Hello and welcome to Gamers Getting Older,
where a group of older gamers get together
talk about the good old days of gaming
and how times have changed for the better or worse. I'm Brendan.
I'm Steven.
I'm Nick, and we are
Gamers
Getting Older.
Wow, that was
perfect, guys. Perfect.
Yeah, that was good, but not great. Hello and welcome back to another week of Gamers Getting Older. This week we're talking about the Sega Dreamcast, going way back to 1998 with Phantasy Star Online, Sonic Adventure 2, Crazy Taxi, Soul Calibur.
We're going to jet grind our way right into all these hot games. I'm so excited. I have been waiting for this episode since we started talking about doing this whole podcast to begin with.
He has. He really has. Every week. When are we doing a Dreamcast? When are we doing a Dreamcast?
I mean, this is the kind of thing that I look forward to so much because the Dreamcast was such a short-lived console, but it had such a big impact.
And it was so good. Like it deserved better.
Yeah, the one console that was truly ahead of its time, deemed ahead of its time, just because of all of the capabilities and hardware that was built into the Dreamcast.
It just looks so funny. Your microphone just like. I waited till you were done talking to laugh. Okay.
We had a really good organic way going in there, and Steve pulled his microphone down and threw us off.
You said he couldn't hear me because I have it further away and stuff. I'm
just
trying to
have
not
it
breathe.
Normally. It's fine. Like the breathing's. We all have breathing,
but not.
Hey, you don't need to talk to us about it. We're not your physician. No, I'm just kidding.
You have COPD.
I don't think so.
There's times I think I have sleep apnea, but
I have sleep apnea. That's the biggest lie I tell the doctors whenever I go in. They're like, you have a CPAP machine. Do you use it? Every night. I haven't used it for 3 years. I sleep better without it. What's the sad thing is?
Mine doesn't affect me very often, but when it does,
when it do,
I basically wake up dying.
I mean, yeah, you basically are. You're suffocating. Your little flap closes over the back of your throat.
Yeah, I wake up and I'm like.
Yeah, when Kate first heard it, she was like, what the fuck was that? You died last night. And I'm like, no, I didn't. I'm good.
Don't worry, I wake up. It's fine.
Yeah. Now she's just like, God, I wish it would just stay over the hole.
roll him over. That's how Hendrix died.
Mm-hmm.
Jimi Hendrix?
That's the one.
How did we just derail ourselves so bad?
It was definitely ahead of its time because it was a dial-up based console when it originally launched, which means that we rocked some family video dial-up playing Dreamcast online.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's classic.
Family Video, Blockbuster,
Hollywood Video, all those guys. Random fact about Blockbuster, by the way, during their life cycle before their company was completely shut down, they were actually working on a movie streaming service for online entertainment.
Damn it. They should have 100% did it. I miss and love Blockbuster.
There is still one Blockbuster in existence.
One.
They run a pretty funny Twitter too.
Yeah, I was going to say they troll people on Twitter all the time.
But the online features of the Dreamcast weren't the only selling points. There was a lot of solo or multiplayer offline games, such as Crazy Taxi, that you could really enjoy. What was your favorite offline Dreamcast game that you enjoyed? Mine would probably be Sonic Adventure 2.
Sonic Adventure 2 was a good one. I played a lot of Toy Commander and did a lot of the Star Wars pod racing. Now this is pod racing. Like I loved it, but that Toy Commander was probably what I spent the most of my time with.
What about you, Steven?
I played a lot of Resident Evil Code Veronica. My uncle was big into the Resident Evil games, and I remember when Code Veronica came out, the gameplay was much different than that of like the old PlayStation versions. And I still remember the one fight where you get this big sniper rifle and you're shooting like this big zombie thing from like across the building. That was always a lot of fun. And then probably House of the Dead 2, because I used to go to, so my parents were bowlers back in the day. We used to spend a lot of time at a bowling alley.
Bowling.
Yeah. And so I played a lot of arcade games growing up as a kid. And I remember when House of the Dead and House of the Dead 2 came out on arcade, I used to play that all the time. So then when that came out on the Dreamcast, that was something that I played a bunch of because obviously playing in an arcade, like you have to have a bunch of quarters to be able to beat it. You know, you're dying a lot. So when it came out on the Dreamcast, it was kind of nice to be able to play. And you just like, do you want to continue? You're like, yes, keep going.
Yeah, that game was a lot of fun as well on the Dreamcast. Did you guys ever play Typing of the Dead?
Nope. No, I did not.
Never even heard of it.
You got to utilize the awesome Dreamcast keyboard to type various words to defeat the zombie menace.
Keyboard. Yes. That came in very clutch with Phantasy Star.
Oh yeah, and also if you wanted to use the included web browser that was stored on a CD-ROM that you had to put into the console to get online and use the web browser on your dial-up connection, that was also a useful tool there too. But who did that really? Did you guys ever use that feature?
No, I didn't.
I don't recall ever using it. I never actually owned a Dreamcast though.
Neither did I. I went to a friend's house that had it, and so we would just play.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember playing at Nick's house and at my uncle's house. They both had the Sega Dreamcast.
We didn't actually have one in our house until it would come out and gone down because we ended up picking it up from. Do you guys remember that store that was on the west end of town? Well, way before. Do you guys remember that store that was on the west end? It was called like Game Exchange.
Yeah, I think so.
It was on the corner of that place, of that strip mall.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it actually was called Game Exchange, wasn't it?
I think it was.
I believe so. Yeah. It was an old retro video game place. So we actually got our Dreamcast there. Games. Yeah. So we got our Dreamcast there, and we got a couple of games with it. One being that of Seaman. Did you guys ever get to play Seaman?
No.
I think I remember watching you play it, but I don't know if it was something that I was like actively like, yeah, I want to play that game.
It was a real life Seaman.
I would have been a bad real life Seaman. So I stayed home and I used the microphone attachment for the Dreamcast on the controller that plugged into the memory card port, and I spoke to my human-faced fish friend. It was a game that you essentially started out with a tadpole, and you got to watch it. Every day you logged in, Leonard Nimoy would narrate the progress of your Seaman. And it would grow and grow, and you get to watch it grow, and it'd have more seamen. So you'd have multiple seamen, and eventually it evolved to the maximum point, and the cage opened up. Your semen all left.
So when it opened, your semen shot out of there very quickly
with a force.
I think he turned around and said thank you or something if you did a good job.
He turned. Oh God.
But if you stood next to the tank and spoke into the microphone, he would come to you.
That he would.
He would well, you know, he would come to like the side of the tank, and you could talk to it. But it was really fun. It was really anybody listening to this, innuendos aside, you should look up some videos of this because hearing Leonard Nimoy narrate the progress of your imaginary human-faced fish friend, pretty entertaining.
Just be very careful with your Google search. Don't just Google like semen. Maybe Dreamcast semen.
Put a space. Use a space. Maybe use incognito mode when you do it, just in case.
So you talking about the semen fish thing made me think about that. You guys ever do the bass fishing they had? The Sega bass fishing that had the actual cast controller with, actually looked like a reel?
Yeah, I actually loved that game. I thought that game was so much fun. Dreamcast is one of the first consoles to introduce motion controls with that particular controller.
Yeah.
That big old reel controller. Yeah.
It was always fun to play. Like I definitely enjoyed fishing with that. It was nice.
What about the controller design itself? Do you guys remember? It was like a boomerang shark barracuda thing.
Yeah.
The buttons were big and bold. I believe the start button was like a triangle, and you had your screen.
Yeah, you had like the little opening in the middle with the big triangle button on the bottom. And then you had the Joy-Con on the side with the D-pad. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it was a single joystick controller.
Yes. Yeah, it was kind of like most controllers where it's got the 4 buttons on the side. It was a green, blue, yellow, and red, I think, on the right-hand side. And then on the left, it had the joystick with the D-pad. And then in the middle was the middle lower part was the triangle for the start button.
Yeah, they remind me of the original Xbox controllers almost. Just because they were big and bulky like that.
Definitely big, bulky like that, yeah.
Which is interesting because I wonder how much Xbox actually took from the Dreamcast, because the president of Sega who worked on the Dreamcast actually worked with Microsoft and wanted to make it so that the Xbox was backwards compatible to play Dreamcast games. They actually worked together a lot. Obviously, that whole situation never came to fruition, but it makes you wonder how much Xbox took from the Dreamcast in regards to design and things of that nature for their controllers and other games and gameplay. Yeah, the chairman of Sega actually went to Bill Gates multiple times after the Dreamcast was continued, asking if Xbox could play Dreamcast games so that fans can continue to play their games online, because he believed that online gaming was the way of the future. So when the Dreamcast was developed and it had this 56K modem in it, and then you have Phantasy Star Online where multiple people, could play an MMO together online, he really felt that this was the way in the future of gaming. And he worked with Microsoft to try and get them to kind of buy into that concept and allow the Sega and the Dreamcast to kind of live on through Microsoft. Ultimately, it didn't work. And then after being denied, he actually donated almost 700 million of his stock to keep Sega from going bankrupt. Because after the Dreamcast was discontinued, the Dreamcast, after it was discontinued, Sega was on the verge of bankruptcy, and he kind of gave everything he had to keep them going, to keep that from happening.
Sega pulled a smart move by switching to essentially just publishing games. Like, we are no longer in the console market. We are a game company.
It's actually crazy. He was very much just a giver in general. So like, even with Phantasy Star Online, even though he wanted to develop this online game, it was kind of difficult because in Japan at the time, in order to play games online, you actually had to pay by the minute for internet use.
They didn't have the network infrastructure that we did.
So when Phantasy Star Online came out in Japan, when you bought it, it came with a year free of internet, in which he paid for out of his own pocket, so that people in Japan could get this experience to play Phantasy Star Online with other people.
Yeah,
it's crazy. I remember doing like a research paper in college about that, and how we go to like arcades to play games. There was an actual computer cafe that they would go to, and they would pay, kind of like an arcade. They would put money in, and they'd have the internet for so long. That's crazy to think about that.
Something that we take
pay
for granted.
A year free. Yeah,
absolutely.
And to say a year free, that he doesn't know what that year could look like from person to person, because it's by the minute. You could have somebody who's just dedicating their life to Phantasy Star Online and playing, 8 to 10 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours a day. I can only imagine what that bill looked like at the end of the year of what he was paying out of his own pocket.
And all based around a game that was really an experiment. Is it going to work? Is it going to play on consoles? Are people going to play it online? Well, the cool thing about Phantasy Star Online that I found was it was made by a group of developers that just finished working on Sonic Adventure 1. Now, I don't know if you guys played Sonic Adventure 1, but it's nothing. It's nothing compared to Sonic Adventure 2. I'm a big Sonic fan, but I don't want to play Sonic Adventure 1. So those guys moved on and made Phantasy Star Online. And this dude that was running the project was convinced that it needed to be online, and he really loved EverQuest and Diablo. So that's basically what he pushed to have the game modeled around. And me and Steven actually started playing recently on a private server just to kind of, feel the nostalgia again and play the game. And while we're playing it, it really started to feel like I was playing third-person Diablo.
Yeah, there was a lot.
It's a looter.
Yeah, there was a lot of aspects of it that felt like that after we had talked about it and playing it again after so many years. You go into different rooms, you're going through a door into a room where enemies then spawn, and there's boxes on the ground that, same thing like Diablo, the crates that you could kick or whatever and had a chance to drop items. There was boxes like that. It definitely had that kind of feel to it, and it was definitely fun. Like, we were playing it. We probably played for 3 or 4 hours the other night, and it still gave me that sense of like, oh, this is a lot of fun. Like, there's so much to do, and this is a lot of fun to like go in here and grind and run through these levels for like better weapon and gear
on a console before voice chat. So one of the in Phantasy Star Online, one of the things you could do is make chat bubbles with like little faces. very often you would have to make one that basically just said no keyboard, because people would start talking to you and you would have to tell them, hey, I can't type back to you as quickly as possible.
I remember those, and
Mm.
you could make them yourself, and they looked a lot like what you would imagine when you think of Japanese emojis. And they even made that sound when you would send it in game. It'd be like yo, and it like popped up on the screen.
Mhm.
I hit it by mistake when we were playing on
Yeah.
the private server, and Nick was like, "Oh my god, I forgot about those."
Yeah, I mean, that's a trailblazer. Before Final Fantasy 11, Final Fantasy 11 has a heavy database of multilingual sentences you can say to each other, so you can actually communicate with people across, regions. And Phantasy Star Online had a very large database of structured sentences that you could use to communicate with, foreign players.
Mhm.
Which is a heck of a concept, which definitely comes back to the idea of, the chairman of Sega wanting and feeling that online gaming was where it was going to be. So take the time to tell developers like, hey, we need to develop this so that you can go in and hit enter on this sentence, and on your screen it shows up in Japanese, but the person on the other end may be in the United States, and when that sentence come across for them, it shows up in English, and you're able to communicate with these pre-built sentences. They definitely came in handy. I remember using them a lot in Final Fantasy 11. You're looking to build a party or run some sort of dungeon or something, and you can use these pre-built sentences to help get people into your group. And most people didn't care because there were so many pre-built sentences that you could use that it made it pretty easy to have a multilingual, multi-regional party of people, and you could still accomplish and kill the monsters you were trying to kill, even though none of you spoke the same language.
It launched in North America in 2001 and was shut down in 2003. Like, it was not up that long.
Which is so unfortunate. It was such a good game.
But it's great. Like, I remember playing it so much. Like, I don't realize that it was only for those 2 years that I played it.
Yeah, I mean, the game itself did live on across multiple
Yeah.
consoles, original Xbox, GameCube.
Mhm.
The Dreamcast was everything we were looking for, and it did eventually come out with a adapter that you could add to it to change it to a broadband connection. So it even caught up with the times, but by then it was, too
little, too late.
Yeah, people weren't ready. I mean, think about all the sports games, all the, such and such soccer ball 2K and the foosball 2Ks and all the 2K stuff that they had, because it was the year 2000.
Yeah.
2K. I mean, everybody played those online. My brother played them online. I mean, before Xbox, people were playing, Dreamcast online.
And it's just crazy because, I mean, there was 9.13 million units sold. So much this thing took off and then it just died prematurely.
Yeah. And, the PS2 was such a powerhouse back then, though. I mean, Dreamcast has a library of fun games, but the PlayStation 2 just reigns. Not REIGNS. I'm talking RAINS. Literally reigns games across all the other generations during that time. It just has such a massive library.
I mean, speaking to the growth of the Dreamcast, it broke records with having more pre-orders in advance than the Sony PlayStation. Over 200,000 pre-orders, which is just insane. Actually, I didn't realize how much it cost back then until I was doing some research for this episode. And the original Dreamcast, when it came out, was $199.99. So, I mean, it was still definitely pretty expensive for a console that came out back in the late 90s.
Yeah.
But where else are you going to play a Jack Grind Radio, baby?
Silly game.
It's in line with style. You want to graffiti something and then grind across the car and flip a cop off? Do it, baby.
I do remember playing that game a lot at your house. That game was
it was just
it
fun.
was really fun.
It made no sense, but it was fun. Graffiti some walls and grind. I mean, we were Tony Hawk fans, so the idea that we all were also aggressive inline fans. If you remember aggressive inline.
Yep, I do. I remember that was a lot of fun. We played so many random games. Neither one of us are hockey fans, but I remember us playing the NHL game on the Dreamcast in your basement because it was like the newest game that had come out on the Dreamcast, and we're like, we have to play this. So we went down to Family Video and rented it and started playing hockey, in which neither one of us knew the rules of hockey other than there's a puck, I have a stick, and I need to get this puck into your net on the other side of the ice. That was the gist of what we understood.
Yeah. My hockey knowledge is basically the Mighty Ducks 1 and 2. I did recently on Valentine's Day, me and my wife went ice skating for the first time in my life. She's ice skated before. This was my first time, I believe. Superfluous information to give to you guys, but that's the information I'm giving. But it was so fun. I had such a great time ice skating. Complete off the topic tangent. I apologize.
No, it's fine.
Oh,
I actually really enjoy ice skating too. We didn't make it this year. We wanted to make it the Whitewater Center here, which is like whitewater rafting. In the winter time here, they set up an ice skating rink so that basically so they can still stay open in the wintertime. But we didn't get a chance to make it this year.
We've
So
talked about a lot of games. Oh, actually, Brendan, what were you going to say? I apologize.
No,
I
you're
just started
fine. I was
talking.
just going to say, so the actual lifespan of the Dreamcast was 1998 to 2001. It was discontinued March 31st, 2001, which is
crazy. Thinking
it wasn't like the Xbox wasn't
200
even released.
Yeah, to think 200,000 pre-orders and the lifespan of this system was only 3 years.
I was just like, because the Xbox wasn't released until November of 2001. Like, I remember people saying one of the biggest reasons that it was discontinued mainly is because, you know, you got the Xbox and the PlayStation 2 and everything coming out, and they had like built-in DVD players and stuff like that, you know, and just people didn't like having to buy something completely different when I could, hey, I've got this new console that I can watch movies on it and all this different stuff. And
Yep.
just, I don't know, that,
Yeah, they actually did make changes to their CD drive.
mhm.
Coming from kind of the Sega Saturn, there's obviously a big problem, you know, even during the CD era when, you know, like regular music CDs were big, of burning CDs. And early on, you know, that was a problem with the Sega Saturn. So the Dreamcast had made changes to the infrastructure of the system and created what was known as a GD-ROM instead of a CD-ROM. And it was basically still just a CD, but it was weighted differently. So it was
Mhm.
heavier than a traditional CD. And many people felt that this was the wrong decision because DVDs contained more space. So
Mhm,
ultimately, for
mhm.
the Dreamcast, had they gone the DVD route, it wasn't just the ability to play DVDs on the TV as movies, but it would have allowed for more expansive games to be developed on the Dreamcast system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the time, they had basically gone too far that it was too hard for them to switch back and revert all these systems that were already in production from this, what they had created, to a DVD. And ultimately, their GD-ROM still didn't really work out because it was easy for hackers to still hack and burn Dreamcast games and play them.
Oh yeah, of course.
Because Dreamcast supported CD-ROMs. So then in turn, they just found a way to hack the GD-ROM and then burn it to a CD, and then you could still play it on your Dreamcast.
Mhm.
Right. You could just do anything with a computer.
Going back to when you were talking about like all the sports games and everything they had and wondering why you've got all these sports games that are coming out, it kind of hit like this big boom when like the 2K games came out and all that with Madden and everything. It actually, one of the main reasons for the failure as well is because Dreamcast, when they were talking with EA about Madden, NBA Live, and FIFA and everything, all those, you know, popular games now, they informed Sega that they would not put their games on the system if they didn't have exclusive rights to the sports games that they had. And so when Sega told them no, they basically just didn't put their games on the Dreamcast. And so, you know, you lost a whole genre of games because they didn't want to
Yeah.
do the NBA Live and FIFA and Madden and all those games that, you know, had already had a foundation in the community.
Crazy to me as a
Yeah.
as a business. Why would you not take that and opt in for that exclusiveness to
Mhm.
to make money off of those, knowing that those sports already have such a big following that those game titles are going to do the same, which
Yep.
is just crazy.
With all of that being said, would you guys like to play a game of Lucky Hit?
I'd prefer to step out into the garden and catch falling leaves. I don't remember the concept of Lucky Hit. I remember I didn't play. What is the name of that game?
Brendan, I'm just looking for
Shenmue?
my father. Do you know anything about the four wood? The four voodoo?
It was
I never played it.
Shenmue. I remember you playing that a
Shenmue.
lot.
It was a great game. It was a life simulator. You had to go to work. You had to.
So it's
there was
basically
places-
before The Sims.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a really cool, in-depth RPG game that you could play through. That you really played the life of Shenmue, a man searching for the individual that murdered his father, and you basically just live his life. Maybe you work as a forklift operator, you work as a Lucky Hit consultant, I guess. It's kind of like a miniature game show. I mean, it's just like a corner Plinko game, basically. But you could work as a lucky hit employee. You just stand there and shout at people on the street. Would you like to try a game of lucky hit? And sometimes an NPC would be like, yeah, let's play. And you would just do that, and then you would get a paycheck at the end of it all. But
I'm
you
looking it
basically
up.
just,
I remember seeing this actually. I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I never played it though. It sounds fun.
super great game. Super fun. Shenmue 2, fun. Shenmue 3, have not played it. Just came out recently. I haven't heard
It
the
looks like it's
best
on the
things,
PC and
but
PS4.
yeah, I haven't tried it out yet. So I like to try things out without, listening to review people all the time.
I think the cat just pooped and peed on his bed.
I'm gonna kill him.
Did it just poop and pee on the bed?
He just shit on my bed. Like I'm sitting literally
What?
right here. Like if I go back to the tape.
I saw him sitting there. I thought he was playing with something.
We have live footage of a cat shitting. This is never before seen Patreon footage.
So now it's
Oh man, that's definitely gonna make the gag reel.
Yeah, I'm gagging, definitely.
Is the smell in there?
Yeah. I have a candle lit.
That's amazing.
See, you guys just need 46 inches of blankets and t-shirts surrounding you to, that's all you need.
It's actually interesting that you talk about Shenmue and Shenmue 2. They were the two most expensive games ever made for the Dreamcast.
Wow.
With the first one costing $47 million and the second one costing $70 million to make.
It's no wonder they had financial woes.
I believe it though. I mean, those two games had a lot of intricate things going on in the game. Besides the at the time amazing graphics, all the NPCs and all the interactions you can have. You can go to gumball machines and get little action figures out, and I mean, you could do so much in that game. So much of the game was interactable that it just probably took so much work to build.
So there's definitely a game for this that I'm surprised you haven't mentioned yet, Nick. Soul Calibur. Figured that'd be one of the games you played a lot of.
I actually never played Soul Calibur on the Dreamcast. I
Really?
didn't play it until it came out on the GameCube.
Huh.
So I played Soul Calibur 2.
Gotcha. I played a little bit of Soul Calibur just because the guy's house that I went to had it for Dreamcast, and we played that because that's pretty much when my brother started really getting into Soul Calibur. It was a lot of fun.
Soul Calibur is, in my opinion, one of the best fighting games ever made.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a fist fighter game. It's all about weapons, and it's evolved over the years. Soul Calibur 4 and back, you had to be a little more specific with your inputs. The combos were a little longer and more intricate. Nowadays, I feel like everything is just a roll down forward, roll back forward, things of that nature, which is fine. It makes it way more accessible. But it's also, I mean, Soul Calibur 6 is a great game. It's super fun. It's the newest one. I love it. So, I mean, I have nothing bad to say about any Soul Calibur game. Even going all the way back to the original Soul Edge game. I mean, if you ever want to see something funny about Soul Calibur, look up some old Soul Calibur games and just search for ring out scenes. Because when you ring somebody out on those old Soul Calibur games, it looks like somebody just like invisibly grabbed them with a cane and yanks their ass off of the stage. They just go flying.
That's
like a
hilarious.
star just came by and they got picked up by its gravity and just was.
That's really funny. Yeah, I had no idea that the Dreamcast was that short-lived.
Yeah. Well, it had like we said. I mean, it had such a huge launch. Like the launch was super successful. It's just once it hit North America, because the PlayStation had been such a foundation. I mean, most people played a PlayStation, and then with the 2 coming out, I mean, it's already an established console in North America, and everybody wanted the PlayStation 2, and then the Xbox coming out, you had 2 huge systems that everybody wanted to play, and
the support of the DVD thing, I think, is a huge.
Yes, I mean that's
factor.
Honestly, when I had the choice to buy, I remember because we got an Xbox when it first came out, and we had an Xbox and a PlayStation, but when we were talking about what we wanted to buy, that came into play because it was a huge DVD era. And it's like, I wanted to be able to play games, but also watch a movie on my Xbox if I wanted.
Yeah, because I remember using our PS2. We got it. My
Mhm.
uncle bought it for us. My mom's brother bought it for us for Christmas.
Yeah.
And that was like one of the first consoles, new gen consoles that I ever owned. And part of it was that like he knew I was big into games, but he also knew that it had that DVD support, which is why ultimately he had bought it as well for us, so that we had that option to like, hey, you know, this is how games are. So you can be able to watch DVDs, but also be able to play Gran Turismo, because that was like the most common game that came in the bundle of the PS2 when it came out.
And you know, the bad thing is we're missing another one too. Like we're talking about how, you know, the Xbox came out in 2001 and the PS2 came out in 2001, but as well, the GameCube also came out in 2001 in North America. So, I mean, you've got three massive consoles that have already, you know, a household name. Like, yeah, Sega was, but I mean, with their Sega Saturn, they had it was such a terrible launch that, or just, you know, the Saturn wasn't that great either. And so, you know, you've got the Saturn, people didn't have their hopes up for the Dreamcast, and it just basically got beat out.
I think it's always interesting to me when I think about those consoles that Nintendo has always just done their own thing, but somehow they've still always been successful.
Yeah.
Like the GameCube comes out, everybody else is like, oh, we need DVD support.
GameCube
comes out,
tiny little
like,
discs.
Yeah, they're like, you know what? We're going to make our CDs 33.3% smaller than the rest.
Yep.
Yeah, what a great move. I mean, they've always been so creative when it comes to that stuff. When everybody else is going right, they're going left. You know, the new generation of consoles, the Xbox 360 pushing the hardware, the PlayStation 3 pushing the hardware, the Nintendo Wii. You can grab a remote and like bowl or something, whatever. It's fun, whatever.
Yeah. It's funny you say the Wii, because the Wii is why the GameCube was discontinued pretty much. I want to say it discontinued, I think when we graduated, like in 2007. But the Wii came out in 06, and so it was backwards compatible and had everything with that. And so, I mean, the GameCube didn't last that long, but I mean, it still was longer than the Dreamcast.
Yeah, the Wii launches with the little flip up thing at the top where you can plug in a GameCube controller.
Yeah,
it was basically just a better GameCube. But without
like,
the GameCube,
hey, we figured out motion support and our controllers. We're just going to build another GameCube, but with motion support.
Yeah. And the motion then works. You just have to take this weird, really long, thin black bar and position it somewhere that it works. Good luck. The cord is 40 feet long. Have fun.
So despite being discontinued in 2001, did you know that the Dreamcast continued to sell in Japan until like 2005 or 2007?
Really?
With the actual last Dreamcast game being released in September 21 of 2015.
Wow.
Look at that.
They're still making games in Japan for the Dreamcast.
Wow.
The top of the Dreamcast, depending on what country you lived in, was different. So like if you see Japanese only Dreamcast games, the swirl was a different color. Because in Japan, the swirl was orange, North America was red, and then in Europe, it was blue. Which is so crazy to think that they made these subtle changes to dictate like where the units were being shipped to.
Yeah, and there's a lot of collectible Dreamcasts that weren't released there very much, different colors, stuff like that. I mean, it was such a great system. I mean, from playing Phantasy Star Online for hours to playing Shenmue to I very vividly remember playing Sonic Adventure 2 and just being obsessed with the chows. I had my little chow on my virtual memory unit, my VMU. I'd take it to school. I'd play with my chow on my stupid memory card, and I'd come home and I'd play with it. And on the weekends, I would stay up so late playing with my chows, giving them energy crystals and stuff, that I would fall asleep on the couch holding the Dreamcast controller, wake up at some random time later and just, oh, okay. And I would just continue what I was doing. Like it was just a break or something, and I just passed out, but I'm back.
Play with your chow, release your semen.
I was out there breeding chow, and I was doing the races, and all of my stock of chow were top dogs. Okay. And you could unlock the angel chows and the demon chows, which unlocked the chaos garden for the devils and the angels.
I remember you getting very, very big into that.
Oh yeah. And I mean, Sonic Adventure 2, I mean, what a chef's kiss of a Sonic game. You play through the hero quest. You get to play as all of the heroes. You play through the villain quest. You get to play as all the villains. And then what happens? My favorite thing in a story happens where in comes a larger threat. And then the good guys and the bad guys team up and work together to take the bad guy down. And you play as all of them in the final epic mission that concludes the entire story. And you play as Supersonic and Hyper Shadow in space fighting the prototype of the ultimate weapon. And it's just so cool. You're just flying through space, and that song is so kicking. It slaps. Do you guys remember the song that plays at the end?
No, but I want to
Live
listen to
and
it now.
learn, hanging on
yes,
the
yes,
edge of tomorrow.
Yes, I do. Oh my God. That trip to memory. Jesus.
It was a great game. Lots of things to collect, lots of upgrades to your gear, so much into it. A reason to play both sides of the story, a reward for doing so, some of the
Mhm.
hardest levels in the game, and that awesome conclusion with that crazy song at the end. Give it to
Yeah.
me all day. Give it to me all day. Dreamcast.
You guys asked me the other day where my like handle came from that I used with Shadow Slayer, and I said I always wanted Shadow. After doing all this research and reading, that is actually where it came from. It was because I loved the Shadow Sonic.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
clicked to that memory of like, wait, that's when my name changed. Like that's when I came up with this handle that I ended up always using. I was always trying to get just Shadow on any online game because I loved Shadow Sonic and I loved that game so much.
He was
Like, I
great
remember-
because do you remember his shoes? His feet didn't hit the ground like Sonic. He had those gravity skates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that game was
What a great game. There was even carved levels where you got to drive a car.
Yeah, there's like Tails is in like a little machine. Like you're driving around
Yeah.
like this little tiny little tank thing that Tails is in.
I remember specifically you had to catch up to the president's limo or something.
There was
God,
some very
such a
weird
great game.
interactions. Yeah.
Great game on a great system that was gone too soon.
Luckily, Sonic Adventure 2 was remade and re-released a billion times on other systems, so I got to play it
Yes.
everywhere else. I actually own it for the GameCube still, but such a good game.
Speaking of the VMU and the fact that you could play its own little games and you could actually plug them in to one another, it allowed you to like play the mini games and stuff against people. You know, you'd basically look like two weirdos standing in front of one another with this tiny little memory card, but you could plug it in and play against one another. It's crazy to think that they had that capability and the storage size on them was only 100 kilobytes.
Yeah. Do you remember, Stephen? You might know this too, Brendan. There was actually a virtual memory unit designed for the original PlayStation that only released in Japan, because we found that out when we learned about the secret Chocobo Garden game for Final Fantasy VIII.
I never really played much of Final Fantasy growing up.
I do remember this.
You basically it was a PlayStation 1 memory card, but it had like a Dreamcast style VMU screen, and you basically just had a Chocobo that would go on little missions and you just watch it and find items or fight something.
I totally forgot about that, but yes, I do remember that. I remember us stumbling across that. I remember we came across so many random things. I remember with the PlayStation, we had obviously everybody probably had the Game Shark, all of those sorts of things before those like necessarily the button codes. And the crazy thing with the Game Shark is the PlayStation had that port built in on it. It's like they knew they were going to come out with this pack of cheats that you could plug into the back of your system.
Right.
But then Nick and I dug deeper and found something similar to that. And I think we had to buy it from Japan or we bought it from somewhere. And it plugged into the back of your PlayStation. And it allowed you to burn PlayStation games on regular CDs. And what you had to do is you'd put in a game and you'd leave the lid open and it came with this little spring that you would attach where the button is so that play like the lid's closed. You would turn it on and then it would go to this menu and what it would do is it would like read the licensing of the PlayStation game that you had in. And once it got past that point, it would then hit the screen for the thing you had plugged in and you could swap it out and put in a burnt version of a PlayStation game and hit continue. And it would pick up using the licensing from whatever game you had started, but then pick up the content from the burnt game. So like we used to go to Family Video and just started burning all of the games.
Yeah, I specifically remember this because you and I were really into that Digimon World game.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the only game I can remember playing is Digimon World.
So what do you guys think the number one best-selling game for the Dreamcast was?
I would lean towards either Shenmue or Phantasy Star.
My guess would be Marvel versus Capcom or
Marvel versus Capcom. We will catch so much fire if we don't talk about how dope that game was.
or the Star Wars Racing, just because of the content that, or just because the name of behind them, like it being Marvel and the other one being Star Wars.
The best-selling game had 2.5 million copies sold. Was Sonic Adventure,
The first one?
the first one?
Wow.
That's
Yep.
a lot of apologies.
Sonic Adventure. That's the number one. Dreamcast. It was Dreamcast bestseller. 2.5 million copies.
Well, hey, that just completely craps on the statement that I made earlier in this podcast. And that, my friend, is personal preference at its best.
Or that could be another reason why it tanked. Everybody bought the first one. It was terrible, and they couldn't put the faith in buying the second one.
Yeah, I just the Dreamcast, the graphic style of everything, it really felt like the quintessential like arcade in your home. The aesthetics of the games, the way they looked, the games you played, it felt like you brought an actual arcade console, into your living room.
I do love that because I feel like there was games that were traditionally arcade games that we played, like House of the Dead 2 or Marvel versus Capcom 2. And like you mentioned, how can we not talk about Marvel versus Capcom 2? That was such an amazing arcade game that felt like it had the same style of gameplay on the Dreamcast. Being able to play as all these different characters and you're playing as two at the same time, and just the fighting of a Marvel versus Capcom game was just in a league of its own.
Yeah, crisp, beautiful graphics.
If you look at the Dreamcast, it had more games than the Nintendo 64 had when the Dreamcast was 18 months old. It had more games than the Nintendo 64 had at 5 years old. Just the library was ridiculous. Just this mass amount of games for this system, and somehow it still failed.
That's just because of when it was released. When we were playing online games on the Dreamcast, our parents were yelling at us because they couldn't call somebody. The phone line was tapped out and we were playing games and they couldn't do what they needed.
Unless you were one of those fancy people that had two phone lines. No,
fancy schmancy.
That was none of us. No. We haven't really dove into that. So what was the game that kept us all online? We've mentioned it a few times, but why was Phantasy Star Online just the best game for Dreamcast?
It got me with that fish. It fish hooked me. I took the bait, man. I was whisked away to a world of fantasy and color. It was a beautiful game. It was very colorful. The races were colorful and fun. The weapons were over the top. How many crazy weapons did you guys have? And also, not just the weapons, but you had a pet. You got to feed this little robot that floated behind you, your mag, and you could have it transform into so many different.
It's always cool when you got it to transform to the second and third levels of it and see it grow, and it's like, oh.
Well, and then when you got to the later levels is when the game really started to branch, based on what you were feeding it. Everybody had maybe the first 4 or 5, but then it was like you could focus on one stat, and this thing had an option to go way left or way right as far as what it would look like and what its abilities were. I remember grinding to get certain items that Nick and I were trying to get our mag to go in a certain direction. And when you hit a certain level, feeding it certain items would decrease some stats and increase others. So you had to be very careful with what you were feeding it if you were trying to achieve this certain mag with a certain ability or a certain look. But yeah, I remember spending hours and hours going through levels, just farming gear until we hit the point where we had some really great stuff. And Nick and I stumbled across a glitch in the game, a glitch in the matrix, that there was a way to dupe items in Phantasy Star Online. And unlike modern day consoles where they just push out an update and patch it, that wasn't a possibility. This glitch was baked into the game.
It was a real entertaining thing to see because it's not just pressing a couple buttons. It's a whole process of opening menus and then leaving, but having the menus open while you're talking to this NPC that's walking across the map. It's like an escort mission, and if you fail, you have to start over. You have to make it to a certain point to switch. But if you're able to successfully do it, then you can just copy a 1,000 die grinders and give your weapon plus 100, and then you can use that spread. Do you guys remember the spread shot crossbow that shot like 8 bolts in like all directions? I mean, the weapons were crazy. There were so many different swords. There was the big brands that made you feel like, William Wallace. But then there was the double lightsabers that made you feel like Darth Maul. I mean, there was the daggers. You had the daggers that you did a bunch of attacks with. All the different guns. I think there was a gun that was an arm that shot a
Probably.
fist.
I don't remember all of those details. I know that it was very extensive. And then even with that, the number of different character races that you could play. So like you had kind of a DPS class that was ranged, and then you're up close and personal, and then kind of like a caster class, which I think to me, I felt like that was the first time I recall seeing that in a game, having that ability to play different classes that would get different abilities.
Yeah, and the races mattered. If you played as Fomar, I think those are like the human type people, or there's the Humar. I don't know. There's like a human class that's kind of okay at both things, combat, magic. There's the caste race, which are the robots, which can't use magic. So they're basically just tanks that have guns. And then there's that kind of elf-looking race. I don't know if they're Fomars or what, but they're the ones that are kind of more squishy and weak, but they're way better at magic.
I just love that you used William Wallace and Darth Maul. Like,
I mean, what better references? Hey, something interesting about Phantasy Star, there's an entire game franchise that wouldn't exist without Phantasy Star. Phantasy Star led the way for the Monster Hunter franchise.
See that?
Because Monster Hunter used a lot of Phantasy Star stuff in its games. I mean, if you look at Phantasy Star, all the bosses and stuff, you're fighting giant monsters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you take that concept and make a more intricate combat situation, and you have the early Monster Hunter games. And Monster Hunter recently got big in the US with Monster Hunter World, and Monster Hunter Rise recently came out. But I mean, it's been massive in Japan. I mean, even on handheld, Game Boy DS has Monster Hunter games, which I can't believe that they can see the screen to fight giant monsters. I tried playing it on my DS, couldn't do it.
So you guys keep mentioning how you're going to get in trouble if you don't talk about it. I never played it. I never was big into the fighting games, like I've stated before. But you guys keep bringing up the Marvel versus Capcom,
mainly because I remember playing it so much.
Yeah,
I really do remember playing it a lot at the arcades, and so when it released on the Dreamcast, it was something that we got and just kind of had to have and play. And I think one of the big draws for me for that game also was similar to the concept of like Super Smash Brothers. Marvel versus Capcom just had this extensive library of people that you could play as, right? You could play as Spider-Man, you could play as Venom, you could play as Cyclops, you could play as the Juggernaut, on that side of Marvel. And then you have all of these Capcom characters that you could play as. And you could kind of mix and match. You had 2 characters that you're fighting with one of them, and you could like swap out at any time. They had individual health bars. So it was this concept of almost you were having a 2v2 fight, but you're using one character at a time. You're like, crap, this character's almost dead, and you like swap them out with the other one. But then they even had attacks that they could do together. You would get up your ability, the special ability,
the team attacks, yes.
And they would come out from the side and start this massive attack, and it would just be crazy. And gravity just wasn't a thing in that game, because that was one thing I always thought was crazy is you would start fighting in that game, you could just carry a combo 100,000 feet into the air fighting and come crashing down, but it was cool because you didn't take fall damage.
Yeah, I mean, I was always a huge fan of a War Machine Mega Man combo, because I liked having like the 2 robots that had the giant laser beams. But Wolverine and Spider-Man, it's really hard not to pick those guys, because I just freaking love Wolverine and Spider-Man.
I really liked playing as Gambit and Cyclops. Those were 2 that I enjoyed playing as. Because like you could have Cyclops may not be the one, he may be the guy that's on the bench at the moment as you're playing as Gambit, but you could trigger this thing where he would step out from the back of the screen and then just like laser vision across and hit the other guy. I know Brendan is laughing at my sound effects, but I love the sound effects. It was just, it's what it was.
Quick question: do you guys know what the energy beams that come out of Cyclops' eyes are?
Laser beams.
Negative neutrons. No.
So the reason his eyes don't burn things and they're a concussive blast is because they're not actually lasers. When he opens his eyes, it's actually energy from a different dimension shooting through his eyes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I believe his brother Havoc, who is basically Cyclops but has a chest laser, I believe he uses the same energy. But that's the crazy thing about Cyclops is if he goes full bore on you, you're getting hit with the full bore of an energy base that's being blasted from another dimension. It's crazy. It's if you
Jeez.
look deep enough into some of this stuff,
Yeah.
it's crazy. You want to talk about like all the damage Wolverine has taken in the movies, and people are like, "How is he healing?" There's a story that actually the catalyst for Civil War in the comic books is this situation where this group of young superheroes go to try to stop this group of villains, and one of the villains is this guy named Nova, and basically what he can do is explode like a supernova, right? So these like young guns go up and they're like, "We're gonna stop you," and you guys are kids, you don't know what you're doing, and he blows himself up and blows up a school and kills a bunch of kids. That's what starts Civil War in the comic books. Later on, Wolverine tracks this guy down, and Wolverine has him, and he supernovas. Wolverine is blown to just his adamantium skeleton. It's just the skeleton. And the guy starts walking away, daggers in the back. He's still alive. His body starts to regrow from just a skeleton. And then after that, he puts on an Iron Man suit and like goes down to Atlantis to talk to Namor. Something. I don't even know. It's crazy. Anyway, back to what we were talking about. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
That's insane. That actually, that you bring that up, that was one thing that I really loved with the newest Spider-Man movie was when they're all three standing around and Andrew Garfield.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler
Andrew
alert.
Garfield and Tom Holland. If you haven't seen it by now, do something better with your life. Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland, they're both like, yeah, we need to reload our web shooters. Oh my God, I can't remember his name. Tobey Maguire. He was so terrible. Tobey Maguire looks at him as confused.
So terrible.
I didn't like Tobey Maguire Spider-Man.
I'm gonna have to just ask you
We're
to
gonna
stop your story
just
right
stop.
there.
Just stop.
Okay.
The first one was great.
You
the
don't
first
like
one was great.
this and the second
It was
one?
okay. The third one was terrible.
Hold on. Okay, so hold on. We gotta stop the podcast. Everybody,
The whole point of this story is the fact that Tobey Maguire
Just
does it from in here, and they're like freaked out, like the ideas of
he has organic web shooters,
like just the idea of the lore of the different Spider-Mans, and they held it true through the movies of like having web shooters versus him just producing it in his own body.
I love that they didn't try to explain it at all. They were like,
Yes.
"Yep, that's how it works." Because it's like I don't need to know. It's magic. It's fine.
He's a Spider-Man.
Okay, now let's talk about Spider-Man 3 for a second. Spider-Man 3 was made by Sam Raimi, who is, of course, making Doctor Strange 2 into the Multiverse of Madness, which, by the way, if you haven't seen the trailer for that movie yet, Professor Xavier, his voice is heard because I believe they're doing a multi-dimensional Illuminati.
I'm almost positive he actually came out on Twitter somewhere and said that he was, like, I think he's actually in it, is what I remember seeing.
So I've also heard a rumor that there's going to be another version of Iron Man that's going to be on this multiverse Illuminati, played by Tom Cruise.
Boy.
What they couldn't get Nicolas
which would
Cage.
be cool.
Yeah.
He's busy making the Tiger King movie. All right, leave him alone. That's the only joke. Okay, listen, we here at Gamers Getting Older fought for Joe Exotic to be free from prison, and no, we didn't. But damn it, that man is entertaining. Maybe he did try to hire somebody to kill a woman, but who could really prove it?
Still can't believe you don't like Tobey Maguire.
After the other ones came out, it wasn't. I just didn't feel that it was the best performance for Spider-Man.
Here's the ranking, Steven, and this is fact, not fiction. You can't change facts. Best Peter Parker, Tobey Maguire. Best Spider-Man, Andrew Garfield. Moderately the best at both, Tom Holland. So Tom Holland is like almost as good as both of them at both things. But Andrew Garfield was a bad Peter Parker because he's a cutie pie. And Tobey Maguire, Which also, if you go back to Spider-Man 1, that was one of the first movies where an actor got beefed up for a superhero role. You know what I mean? He
Yeah.
actually looks like he got pretty jacked.
I don't
for that.
disagree with your rankings there. He was a good Peter Parker, and I do think Andrew Garfield was a better Spider-Man.
So you don't like Spider-Man 2? That's the best one. Dr. Octavius?
I actually like Spider-Man 2 more than I like Spider-Man 1.
Okay, there we go. Okay, we're getting somewhere. See, this is the problem is sometimes people say things that they don't mean. So you just have to talk and get everything straightened out.
Sometimes people say things that are not true, and we just have to look past them and remind them that they're wrong.
And I'll tell you what, I am no Spider-Man 3 apologist. I wrote my senior research paper in English class on the history of Spider-Man because I was so excited for the release of Spider-Man 3. I was so thrilled. Venom, hello Sandman, give it to me. Come on. And then they did a little French tickle with Hobgoblin, little French tickle. And then it just didn't work. I was so bummed out in that movie theater. But what I will say about that is Sam Raimi did not want to do Venom. He said he didn't understand the character. He didn't want to do him. And the studio forced him to do Venom. So I personally feel like them forcing Venom in removed a lot of the story that maybe he had for Harry Osborn to make him seem like not like a complete freaking creep weirdo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because if you guys remember the scene where he like takes a bite of the pie and like winks at him and then disappears behind the bus or whatever, like
Yeah.
I mean, he's a complete creep, like all that stuff. So I feel like the studio is to blame. Well, a little bit of Sam Raimi too, but the studio is to blame for the true failure that was Spider-Man 3, because they did have Spider-Man 4 planned where they were going to bring in the Vulture. And I believe the Vulture was going to be played by John Malkovich.
Ooh, that would have been fun.
And my favorite part about what was going to be in Spider-Man 4 is if you guys recall, throughout each of the Spider-Man movies, the guy that was in Evil Dead was in each movie as a different person. Bruce Campbell, because in the first one he was the announcer for the wrestling. In the second one he was the usher guy for the theater. I forget what he did in the third one, but I know he was in it. In the fourth Spider-Man movie was going to start with him being arrested as Mysterio. He was going to be Mysterio, and they were just going to be arresting him at the beginning of the movie. That's why he was all the different things throughout the movies, is because it was going to be revealed that he was Mysterio.
Huh. That's kind of cool. What's a good not great this week? I mean, I would say this week's good not great would be the Sega Dreamcast. Its lifespan was good, but not great.
But that's just the lifespan, because to me the Dreamcast overall was great.
The Dreamcast itself was
great.
Good.
The Dreamcast was great.
Yeah.
People's understanding of the Dreamcast was good, not great.
Here, we'll do it backwards. The Dreamcast was great. The lifespan was not good.
Today's great not good is the Sega Dreamcast.
It was just
This week it is a great not good. Not good, not
great. It was a very misunderstood system. It was treated harshly and thrown out to die. Deserves so much better.
And it was so innovative, like just going back to the having the internet and like into it, like so that way you could play it, like it was part of the system. God, it deserved so much better. I wish it had better, but it also helped with everything. Everybody knew what not to do. The Dreamcast, I guess you could say, kind of helped in that aspect with consoles going forward. It was a nice poster child of what not to do with the system.
It kind of pioneered the way of how to be successful and how to not make those same mistakes.
Yeah, without the Sega Dreamcast, we would not have a lot of the common things we have today because of the risks they took and the envelopes.
I mean, as you mentioned, the Dreamcast controller, every controller that we have is basically built off of what that Dreamcast controller looked like. Joystick on the left with a D-pad, 4 buttons. I mean, the only addition outside of that on all new controllers is the right joystick.
Some probably argue that that's another reason why people didn't like the Dreamcast, is because people enjoy that second Joy-Con that was common with, the PlayStation, and, continued with that. You go from having that single Joy-Con to, or, double Joy-Cons to going back to the one. And I mean, unless you were playing the 64, then you had the one, but
But the PlayStation.
We'll talk about Nintendo 64's controller for another day, because that's quite a unique design.
You were telling us earlier this week that you had an interesting story of the death of your Dreamcast.
Oh, absolutely.
Would you
So
like to share with the rest of the class
I
today?
honestly, yeah, one of the reasons I was so excited about this episode was so that I could finally tell this story to a larger group of people because so this week's good not great is going to be the death of my Sega Dreamcast because the plan that I had was going to be great, but what actually happened was only good. So, the to set the scene, I played a lot of Dreamcast. And of course, since it got discontinued and it wasn't being played anymore by a lot of people, once it died, I basically said, well, I'm not going to get another one. This is dead. That sucks. But I want to give it a good send off. And one of my friends was planning a camping trip out by a river that was not too far away from my house, maybe 45 minutes. So I said, okay, this sounds like a great idea because I had my driver's license at the time, so I could drive out there. So I got some friends, I got my Dreamcast, and we went out to the river where we, decided to, can do the camping thing. There was tent set up. Now, quick backstory: I'm not a camper. Uh, I've still never been camping because I left before the night was over because of what happened. So the whole plan was we were going to go to the river. We were going to hang out, have a big fire, and we were going to have a ceremonious throwing of the Dreamcast into the river. Okay. So this whole night was us waiting for the right time. It was all build up and suspense, right? So here's the caveat. I went with my friends out to the river, but that friend also brought some friends. They weren't in on this grand scheme we had. So to them, they just see a random Sega Dreamcast like in the middle of the woods next to a river just sitting on the ground. They don't know what's going on. But this side of the fire over here where I'm sitting, we have this plan. We're all talking, some of us are drinking, we're having a good time. And, and just out of the corner of my eye, while we're waiting for the right time to ceremoniously throw this system that gave me so many hours of happiness and joy into the river, I catch out of the corner of my eye a large drunk man just walk behind the fire, pick up the Dreamcast, and just chuck it in the river. One of the other people had no idea we were there to ceremoniously give this Dreamcast a send off, having this fire hang. It was all part of this goodbye. And he was just drunk. It was like, what is this stupid Dreamcast doing in the middle of the woods? And he just threw it in the river. And that was the end of it. That was, and there's nothing you can't go get it out of the river and redo it. It's done. It's been done.
Oh man, that's terrible.
So the death of my Dreamcast and the send off was good, but not great because it was foiled by alcohol.
That's terrible. What is this shit? Ugh.
I can only imagine what he thought at the time. He just saw this random console. He didn't know if it worked or not. He just threw it in the river.
Yeah.
So who knows? Yeah, and I was very mad at this individual, but a couple of years later, I ended up hanging out with him, and he was like a really cool dude. And he was a nice guy. He was just so drunk that night. He was just like, "What is this Dreamcast doing here?" And so he
Did you
just
tell
threw it
him
in
the
the river.
story?
Sad fact: a couple of years after that, he passed away.
Oh, well,
So yeah, I never got to, I never really got to tell him all of this.
that sucks.
But yeah, it sucks. But things happen, and that Sega Dreamcast got his goodbye was about as good as I would say Donnie's was at the end of The Big Lebowski. They had a plan, and it was executed incorrectly. It involved a large man as well.
It was just too windy.
Well, I guess this is a good time to wrap it up. Thanks for coming along and on this crazy taxi ride and jet grinding your way to the end of this video. This isn't a video. This is a podcast. Make sure you follow us on all of our socials.
On Twitter at GamerGettingOld and on Instagram at GamersGettingOlder. Well, we're all on our way to Steven's house to help him wash his blankets that his cat shit on in the middle of this episode. So until next time.
I'm watching that video tomorrow. you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go Mac, right? Like
Do it, baby.